You're welcome.
Thank you. That's not my voice. I'm much deeper. So I woke up at 5:30 this morning, very excited to meet all of you. But I will say that the first thing that I did after I got up is I checked my email, I checked my texts, I went on Facebook, I went on Instagram. I also checked X, which used to be Twitter, right? And in the space of that time, I also sent some of you Instagrams. Some of you got a reply from me on emails, of which I attached massive email files or Word files. I sent some PDFs. I actually checked in with my dad. I actually saw a video that my grandson down in North Carolina made. And I did it all in about 10 minutes on this. You know, my life was irreversibly changed back in, I think it was 1991, when I discovered that Al Gore invented the internet. Now, I'm sure he had some, help from CERN and some other folks. But folks, what we are dealing with today is a system and a network that not only can bring us great joy, but great pain. It can also spell success, or it can spell doom and disaster. And there are those out there, oddly enough, that would want to do us harm. Having been in the legislature for 10 years, I can speak to that. But the panel this morning that I am ever so grateful for them accepting the invitation to sit down with us and talk about this. And I'll just give you briefly their brief credentials, and they can speak to that in a little bit. But we first have thank you for your early arrival after a very late night session in St. Paul. Representative Kristen Bonner from Maple Grove. She actually is, and I will. She has her bio, and I won't go into it, but it's very lengthy. They all are. They've got incredible experience in this, but she's a small business owner and also an IT consultant evangelist. Marcus Malazzo, he's the Director of Technology for Prior Lake Savage Area Schools. Greg Sorensen, Chief Information Officer for Scott County. Mark Treat, Vice President of IT for SMSC in Mystic Lake. Faisal Khalil, Professor Faisal Khalil, Department of Cybersecurity, Metro State University, and Darren Hansen he's Assistant Systems Engineer Director for Fortinet. Across the spectrum, we have people that daily deal with cybersecurity, that have to interact not only with the good, but also the bad. And so what I'm going to do, just to let you know how this morning is going to unfold, is I have a couple of questions for each one of the panelists. And then what I'm hoping is that based upon that kind of sprinkling and seeding the ground, that we can open it up to conversation with you. But I'd first like to just get them to answer a couple questions. There. I know, it's technology. Thanks. Frank, did you perchance remember your phone by chance? Yeah, it's in the car. He told me that on the way in. All right, here we go. The first question goes to Mark Treat. Here we go. Mark, no one enterprise can handle all things cybersecurity themselves. So what external sources are you using to assist you in this space?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And it's a big question, right? There's technologies that protect all of us, and then there are things that we can do outside of just the technologies themselves. So like everybody, I would guess on this panel, best practices are to have things like firewalls. I mean, Fortinet provides security solutions, other vendors do as well. It's firewalls, antivirus, intrusion prevention detection, those kinds of tools. But beyond that, there are lots of things that I think everybody could or should be doing beyond just the base technologies that we have. And it's things like educating your employees, making sure that they understand what to look for when there are phishing attacks, which are getting very, very mature these days, especially with artificial intelligence, conversations that you can have with AI bots. Educate your employees, test them on a regular basis. Well, we actually have our cybersecurity manager. He mentioned Lee Edberg here. He runs phishing campaigns across the entire SMSC on a regular basis to try and test our employees. Are they going to click on something they shouldn't? And it's not to catch them, it's to educate them. If they do click on something they shouldn't have, they're sent to a 3-minute quick video, right? Their remedial class, whatever you call it. But it's good, and we continue to see those failure rates is probably too strong of a term, but failure rates continue to go down. Outside of educating employees, you should be connected to other people in your industry. There are things like ISACs, Information Sharing and Analysis Centers. I know there are some MSISACs for governments. We are part of what's called a tribal ISAC that was formed a few years ago. And it's just a place to have resources to share information about what's going on in the world, how you can avoid those, what are current attacks going on, that sort of thing. You should also use third parties to do vulnerability assessments. That's external. I could go on and on, but I don't want to steal the stage here. I'll leave it. There are many others, but just think of it as there are technologies, and then there are things you could be doing outside of the technologies to prepare for these eventualities.
Thank you. One of the things that occurs to me, and I'm going to lead into this with Representative Bonner. From your perspective, obviously, you have an incredible depth of understanding in terms of what's happening at the legislature from a perspective of the governance, but also the security of literally terabytes of data that people have offered up and utilize on a daily basis interacting with our government. So from your perspective, what is the role, responsibility, and where do we stand with cybersecurity from a statewide perspective?
That is a tall order. I like everyone else here, it's a blessing and a curse on a state level in the way we manage our infrastructure and our process as well. The good and the bad, like I'm sure all of your cities and townships, there's never enough money to upgrade to the latest and greatest at any given time. So certainly we're sometimes working with older architecture that we have to kind of adopt and adapt, which can be a blessing and a curse. And I will give an example of that. We had I won't go into the details, but we had an attack on one of our large agencies. Fortunately, we were able to work with our friends at CISA, Homeland Security, and the FBI to thwart that attack and keep that just to a little bit of a traffic issue. But one of the reasons that attack was not as successful as it could have been was because we were using a lot of old architecture, including COBOL programming. In fact, my favorite story about that particular issue is a gentleman who thwarted an attack because the IT guy came in over the weekend, noticed the printer was shooting out garbly-gook, shut down the system. Later, when they did the analysis, they found that they weren't able to be as successful, of course, because they were using COBOL programming and the hackers didn't know what to do with it. So blessing and a curse, right? But in terms of the role of government, I do think that, for us, a lot of what we do is around sort of setting up some of those guardrails, looking at how we can make things better. Obviously, in more recent years, cities, businesses, and townships are having lots of issues with cyber insurance. It's getting more expensive, almost impossible to get. So I think we're going to be having some more conversations about that. I'm actually the chair of the Legislative Commission on Cybersecurity. And that is a potential topic for the future, but also setting up some of the things around how we really set up best practice from a government perspective. For example, we passed the first in the nation bill to designate critical infrastructure or IT infrastructure as critical infrastructure. That allows us to tap into disaster relief funds, just as if there were any other kind of natural disaster. We are literally the first in the nation to do this because we know it is not if, it is when. So we're already prepared there. As well as this year, I have a bill that's about close to the finish line for cyber incident reporting. That handles all of our county, state, local, city governments, school districts, and universities to be able to have a way to share information and get that threat assessment information out quickly and efficiently, share lessons learned, and hopefully thwart those attacks in other areas. So I think those are all roles that we certainly have to play. I also belong to the National Council of State Legislators in their work group on AI, data privacy, and cybersecurity. And we'll be doing a lot of work around setting up guardrails around AI this year. And of course, the last role is money. Not gonna lie, it is trying to fund things like the cyber range for our friend professor over here, and or cybersecurity grants, so that smaller organizations like your cities, your schools, and townships can be able to update their technology infrastructure and software to get ahead of those threats. And so those are kind of, in a nutshell, our responsibilities.
Thank you. You mentioned the good professor, and so I'm going to go to him next. So in an era where personal devices are gateways to so much sensitive information, what are some of the most effective strategies that non-experts can use to protect themselves from cyber threats at home, in their personal lives, in their business lives? How can educators and cybersecurity professionals simplify these strategies for widespread adoption?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tony, and thank you, Representative, for trying to find money for us. That's always going to be a challenge. But good question, and a question that I was asked most of the time. The number one answer: cyber hygiene, basic cyber practices. Okay, just implement those basic cyber practices. And I'm going to just give you an example with what happened with United Healthcare and Change Healthcare. Okay, so how they got in? Two things: stolen credential. Okay, so somebody stole those credentials. Fine, that happens all the time, and all of our credentials are there in the dark web. I mean, I can guarantee you that all your passwords are there. So what's the solution? So what they were not doing is the multi-factor authentication, the second layer of defense. So that was the missing piece over here, and that's the reason why they got into. So not only the stolen credential, which we know that they are all compromised, regardless, but then MFA, or the multi-factor authentication, which is a second layer of defense, was missing. So number one rule is cyber hygiene, best practices. Come up with strong passwords, unique passwords, but then at the same time, complement them with the multi-factor authentication. How about those regular updates and patches? I mean, most of the time, homeowners have no idea about what are updates. I mean, yeah, I have a computer, okay, and I do stuff on the internet and so on. But hey, is your computer set to automatically update itself? Oh, I do have an antivirus software. This is the question I always ask. Yeah, I do have I installed that antivirus software like 5 years ago. Okay. Do you still have an active subscription so that you can get that updated definitions of the viruses? What are definitions? I have no freaking idea what are definitions. Okay. So that's another thing, that, and again, it again comes with the cyber hygiene. So regular updates, patches, and so on. How about that home Wi-Fi network? Okay, when your guest comes in, do you give them your username and password for the Wi-Fi network? Yeah, I do. Okay, that's fine. How about, did you modify the default passwords of your router? Trust me, still, people have no idea about, what is a default password mean. And I can tell you right now, one of the most commonly used password is still being 123456. Or 12345678. You just add the numbers. Or QWERTY, QWERTY. Okay, those kind of stupid passwords, and they still use them. They just get the off-the-shelf devices, they bring them in, install them, and forget about them. And that's wrong. I mean, you have to make sure that what is running in your home network, you need to understand, what is going on. So securing the home networks, How about that data backup? Okay, I mean, again, most of the time people say, you know what, I have a home computer. Why do I care about data backup? I mean, you might have tons of documents over there. You might have your tax returns over there. Okay, and so on. So I always tell my students, remember the 3-2-1 rule about the data backup. By the way, data backup, people say, okay, I'm going to back up. And then they keep on backing up on the same file, overwriting the same file again and again and again and again. How about that backup file get corrupted? So that's the thing. So 3-2-1 rule, maintain 3 backups. Okay. 2 of them should be on external devices. Again, not on the computer which you are performing the backup for. 2 external devices, and 1 should go into somewhere on the cloud. And I know cloud is another animal which I think Darren is going to talk about it, because that's another big issue, the cloud and so on. Also, the community engagement practices, that's another thing. Find a champion, a cybersecurity champion or cybersecurity ambassador in your own community who can come train you, who can provide, training or session on best practices. So, for example, this new virus comes in. Let me teach you, what this virus can do, and so on. So I can, again, go on and on and on and on. There are so many things, but just basic cyber hygiene practices. So, by the way, links. Mark talk about the links. Understand, which links to click, which links not to click. Actually, don't click anything if you don't know. If you don't know where the email is coming from. If the email contains attachment, and by the way, people say, oh, this is not the executable file, that most of the people now know that, hey, if the attachment is an executable file, then that's bad. No, even PDF attachments can be dangerous as well. The PDF attachment can also run programs that actually can hurt you. So the attachments and all those kind of things, cyber hygiene practices, those are the things that you should implement. Thank you.
I appreciate that, because that leads me into, we're going to
I just want to do a comment.
Yeah, great.
My wife is the opposite of me. And you talk about updating your software on your PC. And every time she sees the update, she's worried she's going to install some hacking software they're getting on her PC. So she actually calls me over, honey, can I install this? And so basically, even knowing that there's a difference between what people are installing and actually a good update.
That's good.
And my wife can't even handle the difference between the 2 of them.
And actually, Greg, I was going to ask you this question. We're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to pose the question to the 3 kind of enterprise experts on the panel per se. But leading off of what Professor Faisal just said, from an enterprise perspective, what do you look at in terms of what's out there? We have in the room a number of disparate sizes, complexities for the enterprises and the companies that are in this room. What are you looking at in terms of the compatibility, but also in terms of integration, what's coming ahead, and how do you protect the same type of data that Representative Bonner talked about from a statewide level?
For us, it's all about kind of layering. So you watch the movies and the crook's trying to get in the safe. There's like 7 locks you got to get through. And so basically we're doing stuff. We're basically saying, we don't want to go deep on one, cylinder, because then we've left all other 6 cylinders, fully open. And so really when you're doing stuff, it's about trying to hit everyone like layer 1, go to the next cylinder, hit some stuff across the board. So basically, if you go after multiple things, you reduce the chance. I like to say, I want them to get bored with me and go after somebody else. And so don't go really deep and get really good one thing, because you have to kind of hit everything. And so it's a balance. It's about trying to hit every area to some degree. After you get one level, go after the second level. And it's constantly looking at the trends that are out there to see what are the current trends. I mean, credential has been talked about on the panel that, what change did, passwords, the kind of stuff's always constantly changing. I mean, the BCA sometimes is, you kind of want to argue with them, but the reality is the BCA has really good practices. So when you look at what the BCA is asking you to do for security, some people say, I'm only going to apply that to the BCA. The BCA users, and I look at it, bottom line, it's a good practice. We're going to apply it across the board. And so simplifying and standardizing, don't segment your network or your policies. Okay, I'm going to do this for the BCA people. I'm going to do this for the HIPAA people. I'm going to do this for the HHS people. The more you segment, the more likely you are to have a gap, and then you miss somebody altogether. I mean, the county had that. When I got there, we kind of did one size fits all. And so bottom line is you get the best of all protections. If HIPAA is stronger than BSA, then everybody gets it. If BSA, HHS, and so it's really about layers. It's about simplifying. If you simplify it, it's going to be easier to do it. It's going to be easier to kind of educate your community and the business and why you need to do it. Well, why does this person have to? I don't have to do this. It's kind of everybody's on the same team. We're all the same security. And the reality is it's, simple, standard, consistent, no gaps. And so just really trying to take that holistic approach. And then when you're doing these things, everybody's complaining at the same time for the same reason. I've had people send me emails. You keep turning the screws to me and make it hard to operate our systems. I basically say in his words, I'm putting the screws to you so you can operate your systems so they are available. We protect your data. And it's the reality is, we're all in this together. I made a comment, we were kind of prepping for this earlier in the week. IT doesn't do this to you. We do it for you and we do it with you. And bottom line is IT is not the security team. The business is a security team. And so bottom line is there's always that kind of push and pull model. But the reality is we're in it together. We need to work together. And when we're doing it, we see a threat that you may not see. And they have to be right once. We have to be right 100% of the time, and we're never going to be that right. We just can't be for funding and capability and time and resources. And so it's that layered approach, going across all the cylinders. Don't hit all the cylinders of one thing, hit every single one. And, everybody is a security team. It's not IT.
Thank you. Marcus, you probably have the most complex, in my opinion, job of herding cats. Because you've got students who go home and forget their laptop at school, or, they can't upload a file, or they forgot to plug it in, so the battery's dead. So they go to their mom or dad and say, I need to, upload my homework assignment for the day. I need to get on your laptop and send it. You can only imagine the myriad problems that I've just described for you from a cybersecurity perspective. So in the context of that question, what partnerships can school districts form that enhance the cybersecurity posture?
Great question. Great question. Do you hear me okay?
It's a little dead.
A little closer. How about now?
A little
Okay.
better.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a wonderful opportunity to be here and share the stories of K-12 school districts. So I have a unique perspective because I am a public school employee. This is my 13th year in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools, and the job and the roles have changed dramatically. To your point, the technology evolves, so do the opportunities and so do the problems. So with that scenario that you just laid out happens all the time. So how do we keep our learners safe and productive? In our pre-meeting, we were talking about this balance of offering technologies that provide educational opportunities and keeping them secure. So we can provide, and I loved your example that you provided, that mathematical equation.
Yes.
I don't want to steal your words, but
Sure.
of ease of operations and access versus security. And as you can offer a wide open environment with all the access, but you're not very secure. And as you tighten security, that's a sliding scale. Some of those opportunities for access can be limited. So what we do in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools is partner with a lot of state and local entities. We can't do it alone. So I'm here to tell you, we cannot do it alone. So we need to partner with our state and local entities to make sure that we're heightening and tightening all those threat vectors so that we are keeping our kids safe to the best of our ability. So some examples that I have in regards to our partnerships is we are in the Minute State and Local Cybersecurity Grant Program. We are part of that Managed Detection and Response pilot. We do leverage the federal government as well with CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They provide a wealth of information. They also will run vulnerability scans for us and penetration tests at no cost to the district. Mark mentioned earlier the reference to information gathering. So we are members of the K-12 6, which is the Security and Information Exchange. And we are also a member of the MSISAC as well. And those information analysis centers provide a wealth of information and guidelines to members on latest threats, best practices, and guidelines. We also use the NIST standards as well, which is National Institute of Standards and Technology. So those are some of the resources that we leverage. And I'm thrilled to be here because this is another opportunity to create new partnerships within this room. There's a lot of great information, and a lot of great resources here that we can leverage. And if we heighten and tighten and we're stronger, we're all better off for it.
Thank you. From the business supply side, I'm going to ask Darren this question. So a lot of jurisdictions, a lot of organizational structures here, varying sizes. Again, so how should organizations, jurisdictions go about the evaluation of their cybersecurity risks and systems? And from your perspective, what are the most important action steps that they should take on a regular basis?
Sure, thanks. And thanks for having me as well. I want to just add to some of the things the panels have already talked about, right? Multi-factor authentication, it is certainly something everybody should be looking at implementing for all systems access, right? And what that really means, there's 3 factors, right? There's something you know, username and password. Something you have, could be a soft token. These are tokens. You can get a hard token, a little DES card. And then it's something you are. There's 3 factors there. Use 2 of them. Something you are would be like biometrics, fingerprint or retinal scanning, stuff like that. I see the 3rd implemented rarely, but definitely hard tokens. Then when you look at, we talked about next-gen firewalls. Way back in the day, I've been doing cybersecurity for over 15 years. And it really was, the principle was we're building a moat around the castle to protect everything inside the castle. And assuming all traffic, all threats were external, that is not the case anymore. There is so much lateral movement of threats and long dwell times in environments. If you look around the room, basically everybody, you have to have that zero trust posture that you have threats on your network. You're not trying to block them from getting in. You got to live with the way life is. They're in your network. So then you've got to be able to identify them. You've got to educate the users. There's a whole process around that. But with next-gen firewalls, now it's not necessarily the moat around the castle. These firewalls add capabilities like antivirus protections. It adds capabilities like, I'll let you check Facebook, but I will not let you send anything via Facebook Messenger. It can look into the payload and really get that detailed. So a lot of the controls have evolved over time. Segmentation is very important in a network. What I always say is find a standard, a compliance, a rigorous set of security principles and follow that. The easy one is PCI. It's well defined. You may not process payment cards, but if you adhere to the 8 principles of PCI, you're in a good spot. HIPAA's pretty well defined as well. So I would say that is following a compliance standard. But implement a security awareness training program. There's a lot of free programs, a lot of paid for. KnowBe4 is very popular. We have those programs as well. The phishing campaigns are getting very interesting. Like I get phishing campaigns that are emails sent from my boss that weren't really sent from my boss. So 2 years in a row, I was promised a Christmas turkey that never came. But those phishing campaigns are very important because you can then, once a user fails that campaign, right, they click on a link they shouldn't have, you can send them through some training. And it really is geared for that user, not geared toward an IT administrator. Having programs like that is very important. Then I also say hackers, threats, they're looking for the weakest link in your environment. And I'll give you a story. We were working with a customer that was a healthcare institution. You wouldn't know them, but you would know who they're in the supply chain for, right? And we were implementing a project. This is a former life where I had some delivery engineers and we were changing their VPN access, the remote access to a different vendor. And all of a sudden they had lots of systems problems. They couldn't make any phone calls over the network. Nothing was getting through. What did we do? It was our fault. We go in and we look and we see two systems that are trying to talk to all of their neighbors and all their neighbors' neighbors, and they're just scanning the network. And it's like, what are these systems? And they go back and they look and they say, oh, those are old Windows 7 servers. They're sitting back in this closet we forgot about. Asset identification is huge. You got to know what's on your network in order to protect it. There's a lot of transient things. Users come and go on the network, but the dangerous threats are unmanaged assets that are persistent on your network because they tend to not be patched the way they should. That's the first place I would look, right? Another thing in terms of just as people move to cloud, we're going to Amazon, we're going to Azure. I've seen very, very large, like Fortune 100 companies moving to cloud, and they assume the security stack came with it. And it doesn't. You're just putting that out on the internet. You have to still have next-gen firewall controls. You still have to have, multi-factor authentication. So as you move from on-prem, a lot of companies are looking at doing that, to cloud, the security paradigm doesn't go away. It just shifts a bit, right? In terms of now you've really got to have a zero trust architecture. So I would also add to it in terms of just tabletop exercises. I want to ask the customers, this is a rhetorical question, but if you suspect a cybersecurity incident, who do you call? The worst time to figure out the answer to that question is when you've had an incident, right? So have a plan, have a cybersecurity posture in terms of, sometimes I've seen it where customers say, oh, I see a threat, I blocked it. Guess what you just did? You probably activated a kill switch because the attacker, they want to dwell in your network. They don't want you to be shut off. So if they get in, the first thing they're going to do is, what system can I find to exploit to stay in? And then they're doing reconnaissance, looking around your network. You find the threat, you shut them down, and boom, all of a sudden, all of your backups are encrypted, your live data is encrypted. It's too late then. So again, that cybersecurity plan isn't just how do I find it and stop it? It's how do I have an approach to this problem? Who do I call? That case where the customer said, what are those servers? And they had old Windows 7 servers in there. It's interesting when you're a third party, you can always tell when the lawyers get involved, the cyber insurance companies, right? Because all of a sudden the customer who's asking for all this help and what's going on and tell us more about what you're seeing will not even return your phone calls. And it's legit. That's what they should do, right? Which is keep a container on the information, make sure you find out, what the threats are. But back to having those third parties, it's probably a third party you're going to call. It might be Faisal and team in the future here, but we're definitely looking into, everybody has network operations, right? Having a security operations center, either for yourself or a third party service, is a hot item. It's a number one conversation that we're having with customers these days. How can they implement a cybersecurity operations center? They might not have the budget to be able to have their own, but there's third-party services that can sort of watch over the network 24/7.
Thank you.
I want to comment on the asset piece. We had implemented some new technology in the county, and somebody from the attorney's office submitted an incident. We can't connect our Alexa device to the network. And I said, so you want to connect the network, a listening device in the attorney's office. Did you ever think about that? And when we did the security method, we weren't planning for somebody to connect a listening device to the network. We were doing it for all the right reasons, but sometimes when you do stuff for the right reasons, you find unintended things. And I have several things like that, but to your point, the asset identification, I wouldn't have thought that the attorney would want to connect a listening device in their office, but they did. Our measures prevented it, and we had the same thing in other areas. So that asset piece is big, and some things you don't even think about. I never would have thought somebody tried to connect that in the office, but they did, and they were prevented. So the asset piece is key, and you don't even know sometimes what you're protecting. If you do the right things, you will keep those assets off your network.
I'd like to expand also on the tabletop exercise. It was a great example, Darren, but my guess is a lot of people in the room or online don't really know what that means. So just to expand on it a bit, a tabletop exercise with respect to cybersecurity is getting a group of people in a room that are not IT people, right? Not technologists. These are the people in the enterprise that are business makers making decisions, understanding who to communicate, that sort of thing. And you have a scenario that you dream up, or have a third party that facilitates it even better, that brings up, maybe understands your environment and brings up a scenario related to government or water or public utilities, whatever. And then they walk through this scenario to say, okay, somebody just clicked on this phishing attack that now installed XYZ software. Who are you going to tell? Who are you going to call to help contain that? If it, encrypts everything on your network, who's going to make the decision if you pay a ransom or not? Even if you make a decision to pay the ransom, do you have a Bitcoin account where you can actually facilitate that payment? Or is there a third party that can do that? These are questions that come up that most enterprises don't think about. I know we didn't think about it several years ago as formally as maybe we should have. But these are things that you can do that I talked about outside of just the technologies protecting yourselves. Having your enterprise protected or your government's protected just from a communication, response, containment, understanding the scenarios, so that, as Darren said, if it happens, you don't want to be asking at that time, who do I call? What do I do? Sort of thing. Thanks.
Quick comment.
Professor.
Just quick comment. I just want to ask this question. Darren mentioned weakest link. Who's the weakest link? Human being. So just keep in mind that technology can take you at a certain point, but then regardless of the next gen firewall or whatever you put it, it's again that stupid link that somebody's gonna click and boom. Sorry.
More rapid fire, but within your professional capacity, within where you work, here's the question that I want you to respond to. A lot of trends happening in the cybersecurity space right now, and Greg, you're going to go up first, so be ready for it. So, what's changing? What's new? And what's on the horizon?
MFA has been talked about, and what's changing in MFA is the standards or rules keep changing. And so, first was SMS, and then it was just authenticator app, and then it was number matching. And we found out a year and a half ago on our pen test that we thought we were doing pretty good. We were pretty happy. We were doing number matching, everything's working. What we didn't realize with the conjunction of phishing, somebody could basically proxy, basically wiretap in the middle of the connection. They could get you to put your credentials in. And even though you had MFA and you had number matching, it didn't matter. They sold your token. And so basically what they proved out was that they went into the HHS, they went into the email accounts, they basically showed us a bunch of data, the pen tester, not the hacker. And so the reality is, whenever you get somewhere, you're never there. And so you have to keep moving with it. So as the technology changes, we've again upgraded our MFA capabilities. So bottom line is, no matter what it is, you have to keep paying attention. You have to keep moving the bar. You're never actually there. And you need to keep looking out what is the next thing in all these areas with, people have vulnerability scanners, and the kind of running trend now is that, well, no one's perfect. So maybe you need to have two vulnerability scanners to look at different angles, that kind of stuff. And so you can have a vulnerability scanner, you feel really good, but if they're all not the same, maybe you need two. And so those types of things, they keep getting better, more sophisticated. They keep finding ways to hide stuff better, which you need better tools. So it's that kind of layering concept. Multiple outside vendors kind of doing similar overlapping things. Maybe two vulnerability scanners. If you're happy with SMS text message for MFA, that's not where you want to be. I mean, having something is better than nothing, but the bar keeps moving. So we need to moving our techniques against that. We can't say, oh, we got MFA, check, we're good for 10 years.
Mark.
Yeah, I guess I'll combine what's changing and what's new. What's changing is the speed with which phishing attacks and phishing, is email, but there are vishing attacks, which is voicemail phishing, if you will, smishing, SMS texting, kind of trying to get people. The speed and maturity, complexity of all of that is changing just dramatically. So having filters in place to filter those and people educated is important. And I'll say what's new is sort of the artificial intelligence application of those. AI is helping all of us in lots of ways to be more efficient and faster, but it's also helping the hackers do the same thing. to put together more complex attacks, more that look real, more that just happen faster and faster. And I guess I will say what also is sort of new. And I'll say this didn't happen to us, but we heard about this in our industry, that these threat actors are becoming more and more bold and more just really want to get you. We heard a story of another company that there was a phishing attack that they weren't falling prey to. Well, the threat actors, it was probably Russia or China, sent a floral arrangement to the spouse of one of the people they were trying to attack to say, we know who you are, where you are, that sort of thing. And they're threatening physical violence against people for giving up credentials or giving up what they have. It's really becoming bold. So things you have to really be watch out for.
Marcus.
To echo what's already been said, what's changing is the types of attacks, the volume, and the methods that they're utilizing. In regards to what's new, for us, it's the layering of various products to heighten and tighten our security posture, and then AI. It is, it's going to be a fascinating world that we're going to be living in. So that, in regards to what's new, can be an excellent tool, but bad actors are also using it as well.
Professor.
Yeah, so I let Darren talk about the what is changing from the defense perspective. Let me talk about that shiny object, AI. And again, right now, what I've been seeing is like, because AI has this tremendous capability of manipulating and processing tons of data at a lightning speed. So I've been seeing some really, sophisticated spear phishing attacks. So they actually, mine the data and they create those spear phishing. And spear phishing is all about targeting a individual in the organization. So that's, becoming very, very common. How about, I mean, again, talking about the AI tools, most of you guys know ChatGPT. Well, there is something called HackGPT now, okay, that could be used to attack. HackGPT, just search online and you'll find HackGPT, that actually automate all these different type of tools. Adversarial machine learning, okay, or machine language or AI. I mean, all those tools actually give or getting the very, very powerful capability of automating the attack. Then there is something called swarm intelligence, like biological swarms. So it's something called swarm intelligence. And what they do is that they use offensive AI to coordinate multiple attacks simultaneously. Okay, so I mean, again, you probably have heard the word distributed denial of service attack. Now, swarm intelligence. Now you are talking about a bunch of these AI bots, that are actually simultaneously attacking, utilizing multiple vectors. So then the other thing, I mean, I'm working with an organization, manipulative media. So you have heard of smishing, wishing, phishing, different type of, attacks. But then, I just saw this demo. I'm working with this company. What they do, I was basically on the Zoom call with them, okay? And then I was talking to some person. I thought that I'm talking to this right person, but he has the face of somebody else, and it's a live call. He manipulated his face on live call. So you heard of the deep fake. Deep fake is typically the videos recorded already, but we are talking about live calls, live call phishing. So imagine if you are on a Zoom call and your boss is talking to you and he or she is not your boss. So the question is, how do you confirm this thing? So I always tell my students, hey, you know what? If you're not sure, pick up the phone and call them and confirm it. Hey, boss, did I just talk to you on Zoom or whatever? So again, that second piece of confirmation is very, very important.
I just want to talk on the AI piece. One, you could get information from the strangest of sources. Being over 50, you get to be part of ARP. I come home the other day and my wife says, she was reading something in there. She says, they said, do not answer a phone if you don't know who it is, because they could be just trying to get your voice, record it to use it back against you. And so even something, so information comes from all places. And I never thought I'd go home and my wife would tell me information about don't answer a phone call. My wife did this, who was afraid to patch her PC. And this is coming through ARP. So you never know the source of good information you're going to get.
And quickly, just want to add, I mean, I know that most of us want to post our pictures on Facebook or whatever. Guess what? That face detection. AI can automate those kind of things, get the pictures online. And I mean, they say, yeah, your eyes must be open or whatever. Yeah, I mean, typically, we have open eyes in the pictures as well. So the AI can manipulate all those kind of things. And there you have your face authentication gone. So
Representative Bonner, help us.
Well, I wish I could solve all the world's problems, but I still get really lovely emails asking if the Speaker of the House would like me to pick her up a couple of gift certificates. So, even we fall prey, right? In terms of things that are sort of the trends and what we're seeing, obviously, we're always worried about the larger threats, right? The folks going after folks on the grid, critical infrastructure. We're worried about folks going after meat processing plants here in Minnesota. Big problem if we can't process our meat and get that into the grocery stores for all of us to consume. So those are really big issues. But I think I kind of want to go the other direction and say that now we are seeing more trends of going to smaller targets, right? Because they're easier, they're faster to process. The hackers may not make quite as much money on those, but certainly they're quicker and easier to access and to have those. So unfortunately, that means that our school districts, our counties, our cities have to think about these threats. Even, the Senate website, which got hacked a few years ago. And while I never thought I would ever say that I'd want to kiss a hacker or give them a big hug, but I'll tell you what, it was pretty tough to get money to cover things like IT modernization and cybersecurity until the Senate website got hacked by Anonymous. And so thankfully, they did a great service to us in the IT caucus at the legislature in helping us get that funded. We no longer seem to have quite as much trouble there. But I do think that AI is also emerging as an issue. And right now, one of the challenges for government is there are no guardrails, right? I'm with a group at the National Council of State Legislators, a handful of folks who are literally talking about how do we put in place some of the best practices around AI, right? We have Minute, who is way advanced compared to some states. Some states are writing legislation to tell their IT organizations to take an inventory of any sort of generative AI products that they have in their systems, how to do assessments to make sure that they're safe, how to have a process. Minute is already doing all of those things, right? So I don't need to write the legislation. Thank you, Commissioner Tomes, for all your hard work, and Mr. Israel for all of his work. But I think we are very fortunate in Minnesota in that we have a group of legislators and administrators at the Minute level that are a little bit more savvy on IT and who are actually sort of leading the way in many cases. And believe it or not, as far behind as we are in Minnesota, we are actually head and shoulders above many of the rest of our states. So I don't know a whole lot of other states who have cyber incident reporting. We are among the first of those, right? Things like this are really critical pieces that are trending forward, but we do have to keep an eye out on all levels. We certainly can't afford to have critical infrastructure go down. We can't afford to jeopardize the services that our folks use every day. Even if Department of Vehicle Services were to go down, imagine the catastrophe of folks not being able to get their license or their tabs or their fishing license or all of those things. And frankly, our constituents expect that government is going to take care of that. So those are really critical features. And with that, I'm going to pass it off.
by the way, Representative, fishing license with the F, right?
She stands corrected. Darren.
Yeah. So as far as what's changing, no surprise to anyone in this room, with COVID, it brought a lot of work from home changes to environments. I've even heard that it accelerated some enterprises by 10 years as far as giving the ability to remotely access systems. And it's not just the user mobility. As I mentioned before, a lot of companies are moving to a hybrid technology. They've got some on-prem equipment, and it just makes more financial sense, operational sense to move some things to the cloud. So then you've got more, where does that live, right? You access the cloud, but you don't know if you're backhauling all the way across the pond and, you know, somewhere in the UK to access a system or not. So how do you secure that when the road systems basically change to be an infinite set of paths, right? Endpoint security is certainly a big help with that. Where I see as far as what's changing now, it's kind of combined with my answer as far as where things are headed. Zero trust architecture has been a big thing. If you realize when you connect to your VPN from home, you're basically, you should have, a lot of companies are trying to give the users the same user experience of if you're in the office or at home, you're going to have access to the same systems. And what happens is, hey, I'm inside the moat. Even though I'm at home, I'm encrypted, and therefore people think they're secure. They get into the network and they have access to all sorts of systems, and they can spread bad things throughout those systems. So treating every port on the network like a secure port, and with zero trust architecture, think of it like a passport system. When you connect, based on your role, somebody's going to define, here's the passports of where you can go. You try to go to anywhere else, you're going to get stopped. You're going to get blocked. All of the systems we have at Fortinet, we're no different than a lot of our competition, a lot of our customers. It's having that extra factor of authentication, as well as when I connect via VPN, I can pull up and see a list of all the servers I can get to and know that I can't get to anything else. That zero trust paradigm is a change from implicit trust, which is, now that you told me who you are, I'm going to give you access to the whole network, versus zero trust network is explicit access granted. Everything else is denied. So only enough, least privilege kind of model to access the systems to get your job done. And along with that, zero trust architecture, all the things we talk about are great, but if you don't have visibility of the traffic, you don't know what's in there, right? If that traffic is encrypted, and I don't think anybody's ever argued with me when I say it's the mid 90s, call it 95% of the traffic on your network is encrypted. So you don't know if there's viruses in there. You might only know where they're trying to go, and you can kind of block that based on reputation, because nobody in your organization should be reaching out to China, for example, right? And a new system that just came online that day. It's a bad threat. A lot of firewalls can block that. What ends up having a problem is when you try to look at decrypted traffic and you say, I'm going to look inside of there. There's good technology that allows you to do that. And then you can prevent, deny, look at threats. Companies aren't implementing it because of the governance problem. Big Brother's watching, and if I'm going to go check my bank account, I don't want them knowing that. With systems today, what people really need to be looking at is there's so many ways to ignore financial applications, but inspect real business applications for those threats. And I would urge all of you, especially if you talk to somebody in IT, it's called SSL inspection, deep packet inspection. It is a new thing as well that's going to take over. A lot of companies are going to stop worrying about the governance problem, the Big Brother problem, because the security threats that we have now really make that a moot point, right? Because just about any threat that's kicked off has been through an encrypted payload.
So with that, I am going to offer up the opportunity for those online as well as in the audience to pose questions. And I have the mic here so I can travel to you if you have a question for any one of the panelists. Yes, sir. Bruce.
So everything we're talking about is about how do we deal with these criminals and stuff. I mean, I know can come from outside the U.S., but is there any legislation for prosecuting these people that is like to cut their hand off? I mean, make an example or make it so difficult that anybody that attempts to do this is above, a felony or something that's just so high that people can be threatened by not even attempting to do it. I know it's not going to fix the problem, but you got to go back to the source a little bit.
Well, I will say, we don't necessarily have a ton. I mean, there are some things that, are clearly illegal, and we're certainly putting in place new regulation. Digital forgeries, sometimes called deep fakes, is one example of where we are actually putting in place legislation around some of these issues. And in fact, I'm actually planning over the summer to work more on non-consensual sexual images, specifically in that we've had a lot of attention around more politically driven digital forgeries coming forward. But cyber crimes are really tough. Cyber stalking, for example, I've tried doing a little bit of work around that too. A lot of the challenge here is that the cyber criminals, it's not like they live down the block, right? Some of them are well beyond our jurisdiction. If they are coming from another country, if they are coming from another state. I was working on a bill on cyber stalking. The gentleman in question that was stalking his ex-wife was actually in another state, and he would continually find her and try to harass her and her children. And what's really sad about this is what it actually forces a lot of the victims to do is to literally have to go dark. In a world in which we are surrounded by technology, she had to go underground. She had to give up all social media, try to not scrub all of her data from everywhere she could find it, which is near impossible. But it also brings to one point that we talked about, or we were getting to earlier, that I also want to mention is we talk about what happens if somebody gets into your network, right? We talk about to prevent them from getting in, but what happens when they get in? One of the things we didn't talk about is basic data management practices, because you saw the U of M not too long ago get hacked. They were able to get decades worth of data. Now, the first question that came to my mind is, why do you have decades worth of data on your students? And why are you keeping it in this partition in this particular area? So I think that basic cyber management practices are really important to remember too. So not only just in case they get in, you want to make sure that you've already done that work. But I think, prosecuting them is tough. And one of the recent requests I got was from Wright County saying, if we're going to start processing more cases where digital evidence is required, do we have the space to accommodate all of that evidence? Every time you seize a computer, a phone, all of these products, where are we going to keep all that evidence? Do we have enough investigators who are savvy enough to understand how to find and prosecute cyber criminals? And the truth of the answer is no. And I think, Professor Kaleem may be able to speak a little bit more to that, but we are trying to actually bring up the next generation of folks who are literally sort of the police, if you will, for those kinds of issues. How do we find them? How do we track them? And then, of course, how do we prosecute them? But half the battle is just finding them and being able to build the case to prosecute them in the first place. So I think that's a critical piece. But so we are working on some guardrails and legislation, but again, the biggest challenge is finding the folks first.
I wanted to add one thing to that, Bruce, to your question. So in a security policy, you could say, is something permitted? Should it just be monitored? Should it be blocked? I've always advocated toward a retaliation feature. So if somebody's trying to attack you, you can go back after them. That's a joke, but that'd be one way to handle it.
Representative, one of the reasons the decades of data, as we've been going through this, it's in state statute. So I think, sometimes when they were paper copies, you stuck away in places, and now it's all digital. Do we really need an employee's record for this long after they've left the organization, or those types of things? So I think you should take a look at some of those requirements on government. It could be helpful as well in being able to clean out some things.
Retention requirement here.
Yep.
Other questions? Yes.
So how are the big tech companies being reined in? I just have an example. I was on Facebook Marketplace. Like I said, oh, I'm interested. And it was after I got the response, it was very obviously a fake account. I went into the account. I reported it to Facebook. I said, this is a fake account. And they came back and said, we are not closing this account. We don't find that it's fake. And it was obviously fake. What do you do in those? I mean, is anything being done about the big tech companies like Google and Facebook to stop, to help, to make them comply when something is obviously a fishing expedition?
Yeah, first, I just like to say there are technologies, new technologies on the horizon. It's external attack surface monitoring. So checking the dark web for leaked credentials is a big thing. And if you had a service that looked at that, I almost guarantee you in your organization, it's going to come back with a report with credentials that may be from an old employee no longer there, but external attack surface monitoring is the only way really to scrub through a lot of those social media services looking for things that are relevant to your organization. And it takes tools that have AI and machine learning because a human can't possibly process all that data. So it's automation and tools that look at the external attack surface.
Well, and I will say in terms of reining in those organizations, they're slippery. Do they know that a lot of these things are happening? And I know I've read a number of articles talking about specifically what you're saying here. How do they fight some of those fake accounts? I mean, part of the problem is, the bad actors can create a new fake account as fast as you swat them down. So for some, I do have to say from their perspective, it is a little bit challenging, right? It's a little bit like playing whack-a-mole all the time to try and bring them down. Are there ways for them to get a little bit better and a little more savvy at it? I think there are. But as far as trying to hold them to account, I will just tell you, I am the author of probably the best of breed bill in the country for online data privacy and product safety for kids. I've been trying for the last 2 years to get this thing across the line. And it is a Herculean effort, right? It's a little like David versus Goliath. They are very well funded. They often have organizations like TechNet and NetChoice, who are umbrella organizations that they hide behind. In 2 years of working on this bill, only once did these individuals ever come to talk to me about the legislation. And the only things they asked when they came, this is the Googles and the Facebooks and all of that, they all came together to try to intimidate me. And the only 2 things they asked were A, could they be excluded from the bill? And B, could we dumb it down so that we only protected children up to the age of 13, which is the age of the federal COPPA law? Now, even the folks who wrote COPPA back in the day will tell you that 13 was woefully inadequate, and they believed that back in the 90s. They thought it was inadequate, but they struck the deal they could get, right? And that was before technology advanced as far as it has. So holding them accountable is challenging. Now, the bill passed in the UK, and for the last 2 years, it has been in place and working, right? It basically says that companies have to do product safety. They have to build better products by design, and they have to give higher levels of data privacy to minors. It's pretty straightforward, pretty easy. And in fact, it's probably the most business friendly to keep them, allowing them to innovate, in that we give them things like a 90-day right to cure for a business. In other words, literally a 90-day do-over. If you're found to be in non-compliance of the law, you get 90 days to fix it before we hold you accountable. But make no mistake, once we do, it's going to cost you. But I think even getting that across the line has been a challenge. While it passed in California, it's in litigation right now. Since then, we've worked with constitutional lawyers and buttoned it up and made it much more crisp and clean. But the reality is, even then, it's difficult. It just passed in Maryland. It's poised to potentially pass in Vermont. I will be upfront. The tech lobbyists got to Minnesota and killed it this year. Even the smallest provision, which went down on the House floor yesterday, would have basically said for setting the highest level of data privacy by default for children between the ages of 14 and 18, because the data privacy bill that we're working on in the legislature only covered up to 13. And even that tech was able to kill by threatening to take down entire bills. And so I think, they're powerful. They're strong. Now, do I think we're going to win eventually? I do. And by the way, I'm one of the folks who is going around recruiting legislators across the country to pick up this bill. And the more cities and states that, or the more states that pick this bill up, the more likely it is. Now, I would love to see the federal government do something more about this, but the chances are it's not going to happen. Usually the states are the incubators. So even, they've been toying with changes to COPPA. There's all of these things. Data privacy. It took 15 states in order to get those pieces in place. It is a Herculean effort. It's slow, but I will say this, as citizens, I want you to talk to your tech folks. I want you to hold them accountable. I want you to talk about that. I want you to write your legislators, talk to your legislators. It is going to take all of us to make it happen, honestly.
Final question. This is your rapid fire round, and then we close it up. I'm going to start with Greg. In one sentence, what keeps you up at night?
I would have to say recovery from a ransomware event. I'm trying to get this stuff in. So we've talked all about, preventing it, but we also have to make sure we can recover from it. And so basically making sure you have the recovery techniques in, because for the most part, we've heard up here on the panel, some state institutions, state entity, they've all been hit, right? And so the reality is they have way more resource than anybody in this room has. And so it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And so really for me, it's making sure we're properly equipped for a recovery event, for a ransomware event. I mean, we work on the prevent, but we have to assume it's going to happen. And that piece is what causes me to lose a little sleep at night, the recovery aspect, to make sure we're properly equipped and prepared.
Mr. Treat.
I'll say it's ever becoming a target of a government-backed hacker. That would be the biggest concern. It's, as Greg said, it's not a matter of if, it's when. And if you really are a target, they're going to get you. I think we have a lot of great protections in place, that we have a lot of good, air gap backups and a recovery and all that sort of thing. But if they want to get you, they can. And we've kept ourselves out of the crosshairs, I think, for now.
Marcus.
The growing target on K-12 public schools, that keeps me up at night. And then the concept of not if, but when, and how we recover from it.
Professor.
Well, actually, I think I'm the only one in this panel who do get a better sleep as compared to the others, because I'm not directly involved in providing these protection services, but I do get involved in making sure that our curriculum is up to date. We are providing the best possible, curriculum and teaching to our students. And as Representative Bonner said, that, what keeps me up at night is to make sure that my students get the best possible education, whether it's basically, including AI or including all the newer technology. So that's basically what, I always think of. But again, as I said, I get the better sleep as compared to all of them.
Representative Bonner.
Yeah. And, I think Professor Kaleem actually gets to train the next generation of cyber professionals, which we are sorely lacking. I don't even remember what the number of vacancies is at this point, but he probably knows better. But
600,000.
600,000.
Yeah.
Okay. So that certainly is a real problem for government. But I would say the things that keep me up or awake at night are, from a state perspective, is obviously critical state resources going down, right? Not being able to pay your taxes, not being able to access essential services.
Not paying your taxes.
Well,
An
if the Department of Revenue goes down,
Yep.
it's a problem, right? So those things are, I think, things that really hit me. And of course, that link between state and local government, and making sure that we're safe there. And then, of course, as a legislator and a human, the one about kids, I'm not going to lie, that is the biggest issue for me. I spoke on the House floor yesterday about a 14-year-old who they used her data to lure her, to track her, abduct her, and traffic her. 14 years old. And every day we delay any kind of meaningful legislation or any accountability and responsibility from tech organizations, I think about how many more of those stories will we have to hear. And as a legislator and a human being, those are the hardest for me.
Darren.
Thank you. what keeps me up at night is nothing. Like, to follow that. Yeah, that's very disturbing. And what I would say, there's a trend. A lot of times people are talking about ransomware, right? And it's financial motives, and maybe it's reputational risk people are worried about. What's keeping me up is the attacks on critical infrastructure, especially water districts. It's been coming up, K-12s, as was mentioned. I'm lucky enough to be able to just work specifically with public sector organizations. And I hear a lot about that. It's scary to think about the number of organizations, from my perspective, based on the work that I do, and how they're getting hit by ransomware, losing critical data, having to pay Bitcoin fines. And how do you even do that these days, right? It's really changing toward attacks on critical infrastructure and more of the political than the financial issues. That's my concern.
Thank you. I'm going to conclude just maybe with a kind of an epilogue. I was the compliance officer for an investment advisory firm for 10 years. And similarly to what you've heard today, it is an ever evolving circumstance. No longer can an entity, buy an insurance policy for cybersecurity and have a checklist that they go through and say, I'm good. And I also spent some time in China, where I actually gave a speech to the legislative body in Guangzhou about the terabytes of data that are collected and can be mined. I was also in Israel, who suffer attacks on a minute by minute basis, where one attack, just as an example, actually put a mole or a packet inside the NICU unit of the hospital. And once they turned the lights on in the room, it shut down the oxygen for all of those tents in the NICU unit. 32 little ones had literally minutes of air before they all succumbed to that attack. I'm happy to report that it was taken care of, and they didn't suffer. But this is the world that we live in. And I hope that this panel has sadly just touched the surface in terms of what hopefully will become a regular event before you, because Scott County is a growing enterprise on its own, with a lot of components that need to talk to one another. And because of the growth of the population and the demographics that we serve, we need to be on top of this for the benefit of those that we serve. So thank you very much for those online as well as those in the audience. Thank you to the panelists again. Your professionalism and your expertise is vastly appreciated by me for what I do and what did. I know Representative Bonner shares that sentiment. Thank you for the courtesy of being on the panel and your insights. And so with that, I will turn it over to Commissioner Bucky.